All right. Good evening, Professor Guha. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
It is our honor to have you here with us. All right. So, greetings to one and all. Thank you to each one and every one of you for being here with us. I, Nishtha Acharya, Assistant Professor, School of Law, Manipal University, Jaipur, on behalf of Manipal University, Jaipur, and Jasol Dialogue, are very much pleased to able to welcome those of you who are here with us. It gives me immense pleasure and warmth and tremendous contentment to be presenting a welcome speech among the most esteemed personality we have with us here today, Dr. Professor Guha Krishnamurthi. I welcome you, sir. Sir,
Thank you so much.
with your due permission, I would like to give a brief introduction to all our audience of yours. All right.
Sure, please. Yes.
So Dr. Guha Krishnamurthi has joined as a faculty at South Texas College of Law, Austin, in 2020 as an assistant professor of law. Professor Guha's research interest is in criminal law, criminal procedure, and jurisprudence. Now, before joining South Texas, he was there at Harvard Law School as a fellow research. He has also clerked Honorable Goodwin and many of the other esteemed dignitaries in United States of America. He has also practiced as a litigator in many of the reputed law firms and limited liability partnerships. He has done his commercial litigation in white collar crime and in antitrust law. So we are pleasure to have you here with us. And I would like to bring a kind attention to all our audience that today's topic of discussion for this webinar is caste discrimination in United States employment laws, which would be addressed by our chief guest speaker, Dr. Guha. I ensure this webinar will be profitable and fruitful to each and every one of you present here. Thank you to one and all. Professor Guha, over to you. Sir, you may go ahead with the webinar.
Thank you so much. This is really a pleasure for me, and thanks so much to Puran and Sanidhya and the School of Law, Manipal University, Jaipur, and to you as well for that kind introduction. I have a PowerPoint, and that might help. I'll just share it here in a second. Let's see if I can do this. Can you see that? Does that work?
Yes, sir. It is visible
Okay.
to all of us.
Excellent. So this
Professor,
paper,
Professor, I request you to turn off the annotations.
Turn off the annotations.
Yes.
Okay, let's see here.
So at the top of the screen, there is the option of view options.
Good. Okay. Let's see here. Does this work? Okay. Is the annotations off now?
Yeah, sir. Great, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Excellent. So this paper is Caste Discrimination and U.S. Employment Law, and it was written by myself and Sharanya Krishnaswamy, who is the Director of Advocacy for the Americas for Amnesty International, and her charge is human rights and human rights issues and discrimination issues in the Americas generally. I want to say a little bit about how this paper came about. So over the summer, the California State Authority brought a claim against the company Cisco Systems, a tech company in Silicon Valley, on behalf of an employee at Cisco Systems. And the employee is named John Doe, right, the anonymous moniker. He was an Indian Dalit, and he raised claims of discrimination, claiming that two managers of upper caste heritage discriminated against him based on his Dalit background. In particular, they sort of mocked him. They these are the allegations that they mocked him, and they demoted him. They didn't give him good assignments and things of that sort. And once he raised this to the attention of human resources, they further retaliated against him. So for its part, we're just at the allegation stage. Cisco Systems denies this and says that they've taken care of the allegations in-house. Essentially, the question that we were confronting here is whether U.S. employment law, which has not really dealt with claims of caste discrimination in the United States before, has the resources to see this as a violation of law. Now, we're in a federal system in the United States, so each state has its own laws, but there's also federal law for the whole country. And California law is generally very, very protective in discrimination contexts. Other states are not so good. So my home state, Texas, its laws are not necessarily so progressive on discrimination. But the federal law, which is called Title VII, has been very, very protective. It is, and for many people in the United States, it is federal law, Title VII, that is going to offer the most robust protections for employment discrimination. So the question we are asking is whether Title VII can recognize caste discrimination. And the text of Title VII tells us that if you discriminate against someone in an employment context, whether you retaliate, whether you demote them, whether you give them bad assignments, whether you insult them in the workplace, if you do that because of the individual's race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, then you have committed unlawful discrimination. And so we have the Cisco case. And again, that's just at the allegation stage. We don't know what the actual facts are there. That will get litigated. But following the Cisco case, there were follow-on allegations. There was a Washington Post editorial in which 30 individuals, 30 women engineers from Silicon Valley, claimed that they had been discriminated against on the basis of caste. Moreover, Equality Labs and the scholar Suraj Yengde have done a really great job documenting the kinds of discrimination Dalits in particular, but other oppressed caste individuals have experienced in both private and employment contexts. And some of the stats are staggering. 2/3 of people in a survey, in a rather large survey, had claimed that they had experienced discrimination in the workplace. These were primarily Dalit individuals. So the question here really is one of recognition, which is a lot of people, don't know that this kind of thing is going on. And this next question is whether U.S. law can really recognize and rectify these harms. I will say, just from my own experience, I have seen caste discrimination occur in the workplace. So, for example, I have been interviewing for a job, and someone asks me, "Hey, what is your caste background?" Um, Similarly, I have seen, I've been talking about, like I met clients who are, starting up a tech company, and they sort of freely discuss caste. And kind of most surprising about this is I think there's been a general sense that this is probably happening amongst Indians, amongst South Asians, people of Indian and South Asian background. But that's not the case. It's not limited to Indians and South Asians. I've met non-South Asians who talk to me about caste in the workplace, right? Using sort of caste stereotyping, etc. So we think that this is really a potential problem that needs recognition. Okay, so for our purposes, so let me say that there was a sort of recent case called Bostock versus Clayton County that deals precisely with this question, not about caste discrimination, but about sexual orientation discrimination and transgender status discrimination. And they say a few key things. So for purposes of Title VII, the question of whether you are discriminated against because of race, religion, color, sex, or national origin. Bostock tells us that we use the but-for test, the but-for causation test, which says if the person would not have been discriminated against but for their status, but for their race, but for their religion, etc., then they are discriminated against unlawfully. And they further explain that there can be other reasons that they're discriminated against, right? You can have a mixed motivation discrimination, and it still is a Title VII violation. And finally, one thing we will see come up in my arguments here is something called the conceptual test. And the point there, and this comes up in Bostock, is whether sexual orientation discrimination counts as discrimination based on sex. And you might think, no, right? Sexual orientation is different from sex. So Bostock tells us otherwise, because what they say is, in trying to understand what sexual orientation is, if you have to look at the concept of sex, then sexual orientation discrimination counts as sex discrimination for purpose of the law. And I think this will be a kind of interesting, there's an interesting application to Indian law on this basis. Okay. So my plan right now is just to go through kind of the arguments for why caste discrimination counts as race discrimination, religion discrimination, and national origination according to Indian law, or sorry, excuse me, US law, give you an application, a potential application to Indian law, and then I really want to have the dialogue part of this, so I want to hear your questions and comments after. Okay, so for our purposes, the paper kind of goes into detail about the caste system and different features of the caste system, the grounding of the caste system, etc. I think that many of you are going to be familiar with that, so I don't want to belabor that point. But what I want to say is that there are some core features of caste that we identify. And we really hope that our definition of caste here is non-controversial, because we don't want our legal arguments here to depend on an idiosyncratic understanding of the South Asian caste system. So we just say that the core features are hereditary transmission and endogamy, strong relations with religion and social practice and interaction, a kind of reliance on concepts of purity and pollution, and finally, hierarchical ordering, which involves stigmatization and discrimination. So through the paper, I kind of walk through, right? And this is targeted, usually is targeted an American audience, which may be sort of unfamiliar with these concepts of Varna, Jati, and the fact that caste may, it's not the simplistic system that's often taught in, grade school in the United States, but that it is a very complex system that can involve linguistic, religious, tribal, and other kinds of cultural identities. One of the main reasons we do this is because, again, we have an audience that's not familiar with caste discrimination and the caste system. And we want to give our audience, right, which are US litigators, right, opportunities and kind of the resources to see what caste discrimination is like in the United States. We give them kind of explanations and examples. Okay, so on to the kind of legal question, whether caste discrimination counts as race discrimination, religion discrimination, and national origin discrimination. Here, I want to just point out why we consider whether caste discrimination counts as multiples of these categories. Of course, if caste discrimination counts as racial discrimination, then it's unlawful, and maybe you think that's enough. But every case that comes before is going to be different, and they're going to have different features. Sometimes the discrimination, the facts of the discriminatory case are going to relate to lineage and race. So the concept of race in American law, which I'll talk about here. Sometimes the allegations will be in a religious context, right? An employment manager may insult someone based on their religious practice. And so we want to show how caste discrimination may count as religious discrimination in those contexts. And then sometimes it might be cultural or based on where someone is from. And we want to show that it's national origin discrimination on that basis. So that's the reason why we consider multiples of these categories. It's to make sure that caste discrimination claims of different types are, can be recognized based on the facts of the case. Good. Okay, so first we can talk about race discrimination. Now, the critical point here is that race, for purposes of Title VII and for purposes of US employment law, is not the traditional sociological understanding of race, Caucasian, Black, like that kind of, construct. It is not merely that construct. Instead, the EEOC, which is the US authority on employment discrimination, has a more capacious understanding of race. And it essentially comes down to lineage discrimination. So if you discriminate against someone on the basis of lineage, then you are engaged in racial discrimination according to the US law. Okay, so pretty clearly here then, right? So, the Supreme Court in particular has said, if you discriminate against somebody based on their Arabian heritage or their Jewish heritage, then you are engaged in race-based discrimination. So in that sense, we go through painstakingly, but we say that because of the hereditary and endogamous relationship of caste discrimination in most cases is going to be discrimination based on lineage. And because it's discrimination based on lineage, it's going to count as race-based discrimination for purposes of US law. Now, that is not to say that race and caste are the same concepts, not at all, we know that that is extremely controversial, and we're not taking that position. Rather here, it's just that the term race means lineage, and caste-based discrimination is lineage-based discrimination in most cases. So there's a pretty clear argument that caste-based discrimination is race-based discrimination and therefore unlawful under the US employment law. Okay, so again, because we want to be able to handle all sorts of cases, we can consider religious discrimination now. So for this purpose, I think that there are two arguments here. The first is a generic argument, and then the second one is essentially Hindu ancestry argument. I'll go through them each. The first argument that we make is that caste has an intimate and close relationship with one's religious status. And the example that we give is, suppose someone said to an employer, oh, you know, it turns out that my family has been discriminated against in religious settings. We are considered the lowest, on the lowest rung in religious, in our religious society. And suppose the employer doesn't even know what the religion the person practices is, but says, that disgusts me, and says, I can't hire you, or I'm going to fire you. Well, that would be, in our opinion, religious discrimination, because it's discrimination based on one's religious status. Now, the employer doesn't know what the religion is. They're ignorant of that, but nevertheless, they are discriminating against them based on a feature of their religious life. That counts as religious discrimination. And what we argue is that caste, because of its relationship to religious traits and purity and pollution, has that feature. So if somebody is discriminating against somebody based on their caste status, they are discriminating against them based on their status in religious society, which is religious discrimination. So that's the generic argument. The Hindu ancestry argument is that when you discriminate against someone based on their caste, even if they are no longer Hindu, if they have, they are a free thinker, they're atheists, they have converted to a different religion, nevertheless, when you discriminate against someone for their caste status, you're discriminating against, in most cases, you're discriminating against them for having an ancestor of Hindu heritage in a low caste status. And the US law says that if you discriminated against someone for having an ancestor of a particular religious lineage, religious heritage, then you're discriminating against them on the basis of religion, even if they are not of that heritage, even if they are no longer in that religion. The prototypical example in the US setting is someone who's discriminated against for being of Jewish heritage, even though they've converted to Christianity or they are no longer a practicing Jew. If they've been discriminated against for a Jewish ancestor, right, for having Jewish ancestry, that's lineage discrimination. That's religious discrimination. So we argue that discriminating against somebody on basis of their caste status boils down to discriminating against somebody for having a particular ancestor who had a certain status in Hindu society. And that would be discrimination based on religion. Okay, so finally, national origin discrimination. So this one is a kind of interesting argument because it doesn't seem like if you discriminate against someone for their caste status, that you're discriminating against somebody based on being Indian, right? You're discriminating against them based on a particular status within Indian society or South Asian society generally. but you're not discriminating against them for being Indian. This is where Bostock tells us something that's kind of interesting. It essentially says, look, if you recall the transgender/sexual orientation question and whether that counted as sex discrimination, the argument here is similar. In order to understand what caste is, if you had to define what caste was, you would have to appeal, right? You would define this based on the region, right? You would say, oh, in South Asian society, there's this kind of hierarchical thing, and, et cetera, et cetera. Just as, you would if you were to try and define sexual orientation or transgender status, you would have to appeal to the concept of sex. Similarly, in order to define what caste is, right, you would have to, appeal to the region. And that's why we argue that this counts as national origin discrimination. This is probably the kind of most ambitious argument, but we think that it really does sound in the recent Supreme Court case of Bostock. Okay, so finally, how might this apply? How might this sort of elucidate some concepts in Indian law? So I was actually interacting with an Indian advocate after they had seen this paper on Twitter, and they raised for me the case of Hitesh Parma versus the state of Uttarakhand. And so, I mean, many of you are probably familiar with this case, and please feel free to correct me if I am wrong about any of the facts or anything. But as I understand the facts, the case dealt with a woman who is engaged in a property dispute, and an FIR was filed against her. And in the course of that, some official came and abused her, leveling insults about her caste status. And so she raised a claim. And under the Act, my understanding is that the Supreme Court of India said that this doesn't count as caste discrimination because the genesis of the dispute wasn't the caste status, but rather the genesis of the dispute was the property dispute. Had there been no property dispute, none of this would have happened. Okay, well, US law and US understanding of because of, right? Because of race, religion in Title VII, but just translating because of, would tell us that in such a case, it would count as caste discrimination. And that's because it doesn't matter that there's something else going on, right? It doesn't have to be solely because of caste. As long as caste plays a part of the motivation, then it is because of, according to US law. And so in this case, right, it seems to push the bounds of reason to say that her caste status didn't involve, wasn't any part of why she was being, abused in this way, because the person abused her based on her caste status, right? Insulted her based on caste. And that's pretty clearly that, it's pretty clear that she was being discriminated against and that she was being insulted by this official based on her caste. Otherwise, why would they have, even brought it up? So in such a case, under US law, under the US understanding of because of, she would have had a claim that should have succeeded. So, that's just kind of how the understanding of causation in these cases might inform something in Indian law. So thank you so much. This has been really great, and I will also just circulate this PowerPoint to Jasol dialogue, and you can use it as well. But now I would love to hear any comments and questions that you might have. And of course, these are ways to reach me. So if you want to continue this conversation beyond today, please let me know. I would love to talk to you.
Anybody can ask if they have any questions.
And I can tell you yes, of course. Yeah, please write it in the chat. I can field it from there. One thing I would love from you is just to tell you where this paper will be and kind of what we're hoping to do with this paper. This paper will be published with Harvard Law Review's Forum, which is their online outlet. And our hope for the paper is that it will get out sort of quickly, while many of these people who've raised allegations of caste discrimination, so that they can use this as a resource potentially in their litigation. So one thing I would love to hear from you about, whether today or afterwards, is if you have interesting sources on caste that you think we should consult in order to give a fairer or sort of broader picture of the understanding of caste or caste discrimination, etc. I'd love to hear from you based on that, because we we're writing from our perspective, of course, but we want to be as sort of ecumenical as possible.
Of course, Professor Go, we will do that, and I don't think audience is having questions for you, as it's too much satisfying for them, and reading given them so knowledgeable. And I request Mansi to give the closing ceremony to Professor Goa, sir. Mansi, please. I think there are some questions. Please, sir. First question is, Mansi, please take the questions.
I can't see the question, Sanidhi.
Okay. What are your thoughts on SCST, Accessories Act, and Indian reservation system?
Oh, this is a great question, because the U.S. system is very different, as many of you know. So my understanding, of course, is that in the Indian system, there are, at least in certain facets of life, explicit quotas, which have, and so if I'm wrong about that, please do correct me. But my understanding is that there are explicit quotas. The U.S. system, as a constitutional matter, generally does not allow explicit quotas, but it allows broad consideration of racial status, other sort of cultural statuses, ethnic status in determining whether someone gets, for example, admission to college, or in employment determinations of a certain sort. So it allows it in this kind of more oblique way, right? But it cannot be an explicit quota. And I think this is, I don't have extremely strong views about this, but I do want to point out one thing, which is that I think that there's a lot of good empirical work that if what you are trying to do is raise the status and provide opportunities for people who have been traditionally oppressed, then there is a lot to say for use of explicit quotas, right? That this is actually functionally and empirically one of the best ways to handle this. Okay, now I think I want to be open about this. I think one problem that many people have with explicit quotas is that there are particular individual examples of people who seem to suggest that this doesn't seem to have been merited in this particular case. This one case, in this one, this one individual was able to avail themselves of a quota, but they seem to be otherwise wealthy or connected or otherwise privileged, such that why are we trying to give them, this seat? Why are we giving them a leg up, right? And we see this refrain come up in all across the world. This is not, specific to India. It's not specific to the United States. Any place where there's some discriminated status that you're trying to, sort of better, you see this claim come up. Hey, I have this one individual case where this person seems to have been, they seem to have been unfairly, helped. And just this is my own view, right? This is not even Sharnya's view. This is just my own view. I don't know what her view is on this. But my own view on this is that's missing the forest for the trees. You are always going to have individual cases which seem to, not be justified. But the whole system can actually really do a lot of good. And let me just give you one example that is in a different context, but kind of it tells you something about my view. So in the United States, we have a welfare system, a social safety net for people who are, below the poverty line, who need food, right? Who have children who, aren't, we want to, who don't, they don't have money to feed their children, etc. And so we have this social safety net. It works sometimes, right? And a lot of times there's an obsession with fraud. Oh, it seems like there's this one person who has more money than they, and why are we giving them, food stamps or whatever? Why are we giving them things? They have plenty of money. And this is used to undermine the whole system. But I just think, as a empirical matter, we can't obsess about this one individual case, right? Yeah, there are going to be cases of fraud. You build that into your budget. But overall, the system does a lot of good. It feeds children, right? Even if somebody is getting money when they shouldn't, overall, the system is doing really good. So this is the one thing that I could say is not to try and undermine the whole system based on anecdotal cases, but really try and be empirical about it and use the empirical data.
Very well said, sir. There's one more question.
Sure.
So the government is giving a lots of reservation based on caste. Does it lowers the caste discrimination?
This is an excellent question, and we see this in the United States as well. So the question, I think, the way I would state it is, does recognizing discrimination based on caste or based on race, based on religion, based on whatever, and does like affirmative action systems that are meant to alleviate oppression, does this fix, caste discrimination, racial discrimination, etc., or does it further entrench caste discrimination, racial discrimination, etc.? There's a concern that if you recognize these statuses and seek to alleviate them based on quotas, based on affirmative action, that's what we call the system in the United States, maybe you're working counterproductively. This is a very difficult philosophical question. I think my own view is that, the sort of broad abstract question of, are we further entrenching the system, right, must come later in time. The first key thing is to alleviate the true suffering held by oppressed populations. So I think that should be our, it's all about triage, right? It's all about prioritization. My sort of view is prioritize the discrimination first, alleviating the discrimination, giving people the right kind of opportunities, etc. And then once you're convinced that people really do have equal opportunity, or they have ways of succeeding, pathways of success, then maybe you can think about getting rid of the system. But until you get there, right, there is a fear, right, that this is sort of like people getting a head start in the race and then saying, well, it's all let's not, we don't need to make up for the head start. Let's all just keep running. Well, you know that once you get a head start, especially when it comes to monetary and educational opportunities, those just exponentially increase, right? It doesn't stay the same, right? And so I think we need to get to at least, it doesn't have to be perfectly equal, but we need to get to a realm of equality before we think about becoming caste blind and race blind, etc. So that's just my own view. I know it's controversial, so I just speak for myself in that regard. But yeah.
Sir, there's one more question. Should I ask?
Sure.
Okay. So, how did Ambedkar's struggle for casteless society in India help US world?
Help US. I just missed the last word.
US and other world.
Oh, so I think Ambedkar's writings on caste are some of the most excellent writings about systems of oppression, right? So Ambedkar, of course, was writing about a particular system, but his insights they pervade any kind of system of oppression. And I think it is very telling that people who think long and hard about racial discrimination in the United States, right, including Isabel Wilkerson, who just recently wrote this celebrated book called Caste, that seeks to understand racial discrimination in the United States by appeal to, among other things, the Indian caste system. I think it is very telling that people have seen in Ambedkar's insights many of the same struggles and relationships between dominant and oppressed populations. I think his insights are just so, they're really, really universal when we're thinking about systems of oppression. In particular, one that we quote in the paper and that I think is really interesting is that oppressed status, right, often does not stay within its own realm. So I think Ambedkar has this very famous, quote that says, if and when Hindus migrate, right, they will also take the caste system with them. And, I think it's so interesting that we are seeing among the population in the United States, H-1B, right, H-1B visas. So many of them are extremely educated, and they sort of have been exposed to the sort of at least the understanding of the caste system as an oppressive system and everything. It still comes with them, right? And I think this is true of many oppressive sort of systems across the world. There's one, the Japanese caste system is sort of famously recognized. There's caste systems all throughout Africa, including in Nigeria. And many of those are replicated in immigrant populations in other countries, principally the United States. We just see it come out. I think that recognition by Ambedkar is really so insightful.
So true, sir. You are very well said. So with this, we move towards the end of this session. On behalf of Jasol Dialogue, School of Law, Manipal University, Jaipur, I, Mansi Sharma, extend a hearty vote of thanks to our guest, Dr. Guha Krishnamurthi. Sir, we all would like to acknowledge our gratitude to you for gracing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinions today. We are all inspired by your great words. I'm positive positive that this will surely encourage us in our future endeavors. I hope the words of wisdom imparted by our guest will prove to be informative and insightful for all our attendees. I would specially thank Dr. Vijay Lakshmi Sharma ma'am, who is the director and School of Law Manipal University, Jaipur. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to our technical support Just Corpus, media partner Knowledge Stays, and to all our attendees for paying their valuable attention. And it goes without saying our team for the perfect logistic support and guidance without whom this event wouldn't have been possible. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of a very motivated and dedicated students. It's not possible to thank everyone for such an appreciating involvement and the willingness they have expressed to make their webinar a success. Last but not the least, we thank you all for being with us this evening. It's been a great pleasure. Have a nice day and stay safe. Thank you.
I might just add one thing. I'll just add one thing. For those of you who are
Yes, sir.
students, if I can ever be of help in any of your further endeavors, please just feel free to reach out. You have my email. Just please reach out. I'm happy to help and continue our conversations, but really help you get to whatever I can do to help you.
We would be
Thank
honored
you
to,
so much
sir.
for coming, sir.
Thank you.
And sir, it was really insightful, sir,
Sir,
that you
please
have come and
provide your
shared so
email
much
ID.
knowledge, sir.
I will give you my this PowerPoint, and it'll have my email ID on it. I'll give it to Sanidhya.
Oh,
Okay, sir.
thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Great day, sir.
You too.